I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: what should we do when an online discussion becomes irrational? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because I've gone to the viewer mailbag and I've received this email from Jason, and this is what he has said. Brendan, I have a potential question for you for the Daily Question. Today I was involved in a discussion online about some political issues, and someone told me unironically that George Orwell's Animal Farm could just as easily have been written about the American Revolution. Well, I guess that's one opinion that you could have about that. And that Stalin killed only about 3 million people. Well, I would suggest that if you are talking about the slaughter of 3 million lives, the fact that you are even using the word only, and by the way, that's a direct quote, that word, he's lifted it from the comment itself, it's in quotation marks, and you're putting the word only in front of that, I would suggest that your perspective is not right at all on this issue. You do not talk about the slaughter of 3 million innocents, let alone all the rest that you're missing from that total, and use the word only in front of it. It's an absolute insult and affront to the human dignity of those people whose lives were lost in that slaughter. And that anyone who believes that communism is worse than Nazism is either a Nazi or has been brainwashed by Nazis. Well, communism and Nazism are both very evil ideologies, and they have an impulse to tyranny, abuse of human dignity, and a failure to respect the good, the well-being, the rights, and the dignity of human persons. They sort of share that in common. There's different manifestations of it, but they do share that evil in common. However, if you look at the victim tally, there's no doubting that communism comes out on the worst side of that, because communism has killed more people. So no, it's not Nazi propaganda to suggest that communism was worse in that regard. He then goes on to say that this is sort of becoming more and more of a common example where basically people now have set themselves up with their own facts and their own versions of events, and they're not really listening, and they've crafted for themselves a whole set of beliefs, but they are built on a whole lot of historical or other factual flaws that are not true, and this has now created a web of deception for them. This is an interesting point that you raise, and I think the internet in particular is not helpful in this regard, because one of the things that we know from psychology testing is that if you repeat something that's not true to a person on a regular basis or multiple times, it's more likely that they'll actually come to believe that it's true, or come to believe there's some merit in it. So even just the act of repetition, and of course the internet allows people to repeat things over and over and over again in a very uncontrolled kind of way. So it's kind of understandable how people would actually buy into complete factual inaccuracies. And then of course there's the way in which the internet now often traps us in silos, and you get yourself into an echo chamber, and you've got a group of people around you, and I don't know, the pro-communism Reddit thread, who are all telling you, no, it's a lie, only about 3 million people died, it's not as bad as they're saying, the Nazis were worse, and you hear that over and over again, and you're having that reinforced, and so you actually come to believe it's true. He goes on to say this: normally I think it's usually good to start conversations by trying to iron out some disagreements over relatively small and specific claims, because you're never going to change a person's entire worldview in one conversation. And you're right, that's a very good idea and a very good strategy. But I don't even know where to start when it comes to situations like this one. Every one of those claims comes with a plethora of implicit assumptions that it would take hours to sort out, and it seems like they're all interconnected, intertwined, and mutually supporting in such a way that it's almost impossible to question even a small and specific claim without coming up against the full force of the person's entire worldview. I think that's probably true in a lot of cases though. Now that is a consistent issue, that often issues are married into a much bigger context, that people don't compartmentalize issues. They very much allow their ideological filter to actually be the thing through which they read or interpret different issues and moral questions and things like that. Do you have any insight into this beside the idea of starting small? Where does one even begin? Or do you think it's better to just not engage with people like this? I really hate that last possibility, because I think rational discussion is the only good way to solve problems in our culture, but I'm sure it really does have to apply to some people. Sincerely, Jason. Jason, thanks for your email. It's great to hear from you. Here's a couple of things that I would suggest to you or anyone else who finds themselves in this particular situation, where you're on the receiving end of a conversation or a dialogue and you're online and things have just gone into the spectacularly irrational realm. First of all, I would say that yes, rationality is important, but what's also important is that you are both rational and you are charitable. It is no good if you are presenting rational arguments, but you are doing it in the most uncharitable way possible. If you lack charity, that is just going to drive the person further away from the truth. They're not going to be interested in hearing the truth if they see a whole lot of insults being thrown at them. So you look at them with a sort of disdain. How could you believe such a stupid thing? You're an idiot. And then you try and say something rational. It's just not going to fly. Now, the other reason why I think charity is important, aside from the fact that they are human persons too, and they still have human dignity, even if they have ideas that are wrong, and we should respect their human dignity. I was talking about this the other day on the Daily Question. I really do believe it's so fundamentally important to respect the human dignity of other persons, including in our dialogue and our conversation. I think that should be our starting point. And it's the only way we're ever going to remove toxicity from the public square and recover a more rational, robust, and I think civil dialogue in the public square is actually when we start from that point of respecting the dignity and engaging with others with charity, even when we disagree with them strongly. But thirdly, it's really important, I think, to have charity because often there are other people watching. There's a lot of lurking with intent that goes on in the internet, particularly in comm boxes. And so if people see you losing the plot, they're going to be less likely to be receptive. Now, the person that you are dialoguing with, they may not be receptive to the truth, but there may be 10, 15, 20, 100 other people that are watching that comment thread or come back to that comment thread and see what you've written, who might be more receptive to the truth if there is a charitable and rational engagement going on from your part. So yes, be rational. Obviously, also be charitable. And like you say, start small. Start small. Don't try and tackle the whole worldview in one day. Rome wasn't built in a day. The way in which you think about your own life, if you've shifted your views on an issue, you have shifted your views on a moral issue, you've shifted your views on a political question, where perhaps you once really had quite strongly held views, it didn't happen instantaneously. It was a process. And it was a process where effectively someone or something gave you the space to mull over the truth that you weren't corresponding to, and that space allows you to sort of let go of your pride and your ego and to move closer towards the truth. I would also say know when to quit, because sometimes, and particularly online dialogue, they just get completely out of hand, and it often happens very, very quickly. So know when to quit. If someone is becoming extremely irrational, they are becoming ludicrous in the comments they're posting, or you can see that you are starting to lose your cool and you're not really seeing the wood for the trees, it's far better just to quit, to sort of charitably bow out and just to say, okay, I accept this is where you're coming from. You know, we're going to disagree. We're just going to have to agree to disagree. Don't try and score points. Don't try and score the last comment points. You know, I can no longer stay in this discussion. This is the discussion for idiots, and I will say this one last thing in your ignorance, and then I am out. Don't do that. That trust me, that really gets people's heckles up. Don't do anything like that. Just say, look, I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree. I hope that in future perhaps we can come back to charitably dialoguing about this issue. Something like that, and then just call it quits. You are right when you talk about starting small, but I would also say make sure that you back up when you respond to those small points. Have some reference sites or scholarly books or scholarly articles that you can point someone to. Now, this is really important, I think, particularly when you're talking about a case like this where someone is disputing, you know, pretty basic sort of historical facts and figures. To be able to say to them, well, have you actually seen this? Point them in the direction of a reliable site. Not something that might be politically tainted, but something that actually has a scholarly reputation. Or point them to an article or a book, a good, reliable scholarly work that's not about trying to score political points, that's just going to tell them the truth. And the one last thing I'd say is this, and this is the really big and important point that your question actually sort of raises here and is pointing to, and that is the fact that even when we are trying to have a rational dialogue with someone, I think what really matters is that that rational dialogue needs to happen in the context of relationship. It needs to be communal. There needs to be community, I think, for that dialogue to be at its most effective. There needs to be a journeying of sorts that happens between people who are on this process called life and I guess in many ways discovering different things. Someone might be a bit further along on the journey, someone might be further back here. But I think that relationship aspect really matters. It's a lot harder to engage in rational discourse or even difficult and big issues with people when you're so disconnected and when you're dealing solely with text. And that's really where the internet is at its weakest. And a lot of comm boxes, this is why problems really evolve very quickly, is because you're dealing just with text-based communication. And we've known about this for a long time. We've known since the advent of email and when that began to take off, that particularly in office and in office politics and things like that, that what you'd find is it was very, very easy to misunderstand what someone was saying because you weren't hearing their voice. So you weren't hearing the tone of their voice, their inflection, all those kind of things. You weren't seeing their facial expressions. All of the normal things that really generate empathy and help with understanding are missing when you communicate on a text-based medium. And of course what happens is then it is more prone to irrational excess, to outburst. It's something we call online disinhibition effect, which is a real problem here, and it happens to people on the internet or whenever they get online if they are not careful. And online disinhibition effect manifests itself for a couple of reasons. Number one is when you're online, you tend to be engaging with a device and there's no one else present, or it's just you and the device. That's the world you go into. And so you often forget that lots of people are there or that you're dealing with a person on the other end of us. The other way in which this manifests itself is the fact that because you're dealing with a device and you're not seeing a person, you're not hearing their voice, you're not seeing their body language, you're not seeing their facial expressions, any of those kind of things, your normal empathy controls don't function like they should. And so it's very easy to read into, to misinterpret, and also to go way too far in what you say to someone. You say and do things that you would never normally say or do if you were in the same room with that person. And so I think this is why the relational aspect of dialogue, even rational dialogue, you're presenting important rational facts, there needs to be a relational component to this of some kind. There needs to be community to it. This is one of the reasons why I'm quite big now on YouTube, rather than I used to spend a lot of time blogging, but I shut down my blog because I found that the text-based medium, it was a lot harder to convey to people who were my audience how I really felt about issues. You can come here, you can hear my voice, you can see my body language, you can see my facial expressions, you can tell when my intonation changes when I'm talking about issues. And that gives you a greater sense of not just what I really mean, but also who I am and where I'm coming from. And I think it's a lot easier and it promotes a lot more understanding to sort of build a community around this type of medium, whereas text-based communication is notoriously unreliable. And so it really does raise that bigger question. Should we perhaps be looking for more and more ways to try, and even if it means going smaller, which I think probably is ultimately going to be better because of the goodness that will come from it, but actually dialoguing with people in the real world, actually connecting with real flesh and blood human beings and talking through the big questions without a pixelated device stuck in our face between us and them. And how much better and more fruitful is that dialogue going to become, and how much better and more fruitful is our search for the truth going to become if we do that. This is very much the method of Socrates, who gets a group of students around him in a discussion circle and they delve deeper into the truth by continually questioning, by asking questions, seeking to delve deeper into it. And I think that that's one way in which internet-based discussion can be a real big problem for us, aside from the echo chamber, which of course tends to confirm us into those errors and perhaps those more vociferous ways of treating people who don't see the world the way we do, who don't have that same understanding or who don't agree with us. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There is a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you next week on The Daily Question.